Now here is the risk that the Browns had to take with I love you, Cleveland. And I love you, Ohio. And a very pleasant welcome to this week's version of Bonus Time with Drennan here on the Big Play Sports Network. Hi, I'm Bruce Drennan along with Ryan Smith. Great to have you aboard. This is going to be a baseball-oriented show today. Doug Kurkul, native Clevelander, has written a book about baseball in the 1960s. Fascinating look at that tremendous era. I don't know if there'll ever be another era like it in baseball, but we'll get to that a little bit later. I'm going to devote 2 segments to him. We've got a lot on the Guardians, but first I want to look at the Browns Stadium issue and the Cavs. And first, before any of that, how you doing, partner?
I'm doing really well, Bruce. I'm excited to talk to Doug. Believe it or not, I don't have much knowledge on baseball in the 60s and 70s, as that may surprise many viewers here on Bonus Time, but I'm looking forward to taking a little history lesson and going down memory lane.
Yeah, by all means, don't miss it, fans, because it's good stuff that, like I say, I don't know if we'll ever see another era like it. I said I wanted to start with the last week. Governor Mike DeWine signed a state budget bill that approved a plan to help build the new stadium for the Browns in Brook Park. $600 million from the state's unclaimed property fund are going to be used. That would represent about 1/4 of the estimated $2.4 billion construction budget. Now, a lawsuit has been filed calling the financial plan unconstitutional and unlawful, misappropriation of private property. Now, this approves a change in the Art Modell law. Now, that law prohibited professional sports teams from relocating, fear that a city with a storied tradition would lose their franchise. But this amendment to the law makes it clear that this is only in the case of a team attempting to leave the state, which is not the case here. The Browns would be moving from inside the city limits of Cleveland to a Cleveland suburb. Meanwhile, Cleveland Mayor Justin Bibb, who has denounced Governor DeWine's proposal, is now saying that if the Browns leave for Brook Park, it almost seems, I saw the video of this, it almost seems like he feels it's a foregone conclusion. But he says if they do leave, the lakefront property where the current stadium stands would be developed. To what? He didn't say. I propose he probably doesn't even know. Ryan?
You know, it's interesting, Bruce. I would love to know these politicians that are fighting this, how much they truly are in the stance of they hate to see the Browns leave downtown. It would just tear their heart out. And how much of this is just a political push. They want the good. They're trying to save face. We need the Browns downtown. I'm a true Clevelander because I think the latter would be the majority of how politicians truly feel if you were to interrogate them. Bruce, I don't know. I'm tired of hearing it. I've heard the Modell law more than I'd like to in this last year. It seems like it's been 2 years at this point. I'm ready to just get a move on. If they're going to figure out the traffic, the parking, and all that, and it's a beautiful facility, Bruce, I'm ready to head on down to Brook Park and watch the Browns.
Well, you know, the mistake was made when they built this current stadium. They should have built a dome then. And I was on 1100 radio screaming 38 states and half of Canada that they should build a dome. And they would eventually regret it. And here it is. It finally came to fruition all these decades later. And they missed the boat back then. So now I guess they're getting what they deserve. I hate to see downtown damaged by this, though, because if you look at mid-level markets across the country, the sports professional venues are all in the downtown area. Cincinnati, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, all markets our size, Baltimore, all the markets our size are in the downtown area. The only exception to that, to my knowledge, is Kansas City, where both Arrowhead and the baseball stadium use an adjoining parking lot, and they are in the suburbs. But with that being said, I think it's inevitable now that the Browns will be breaking ground. And when did they say that'd be done? 29?
I believe 2029 is the final, so I think 2028 would probably probably be the last year that they play at the stadium.
Yeah.
And like you said, they've been saying they're going to develop the lakefront for years, Bruce. So
Yeah.
I guess if this finally is going to make them push to do something with it, maybe it'll be a good thing.
Yeah, maybe so. But I'll tell you what, it's going to mean a lot of jobs. It'll mean a lot of labor jobs in building that stadium in Brook Park. That's a good thing. All right, let me shift to the Cavs. Well, we know that Sam Merrill agreed to the 4-year, $11 million deal, and Larry Nance Jr. returns, and I think he'll be a very nice, beneficial addition to the Cavs roster. But last week I did a long piece on the positives and the negatives of the possibility of LeBron James returning, because those rumors were swirling like crazy. Let me follow up this week by briefly saying this. Word is that the Cavs are not interested in a LeBron James deal. I get that from inside dope from the Cavs organization. Now, here's the reality financially and cap-wise. It's simply this. In order for a trade for LeBron James to work and to be legal, according to the CBA, is that the Cavs would have to trade Darius Garland, who's going to be coming off surgery, and two of the following players: Jared Allen, DeAndre Hunter, and or Max Strus. Question for you. For all of you who are holding out hope that LeBron can come back and end his career here and lead us to the promised land again, do you want to gut this team for the gamble of winning it all next season? Ryan?
I mean, Bruce, my answer might not be popular, but my answer is yes. I mean, Max Strus I'd like to keep, but if I was to trade Darius Garland, Jared Allen, and DeAndre Hunter and make it a 3-team trade, however many teams it needs to be to get LeBron James back in this city, I'm going to do it. Max Strus and Donovan Mitchell are really the only two Cavaliers that have consistently showed up in the playoffs. Darius Garland has his questions. Of course, health is a main issue. Jared Allen obviously hasn't shown up in the postseason multiple years. And DeAndre Hunter, newly acquired. Could he be good? Sure, but I'll tell you this, even at his young age, he's not going to be as good as LeBron James is. And they need somebody to get in there and treat that like boot camp, Bruce. And I think LeBron's the guy to do that.
That's why I said, question for you and him. Back in a minute, we shift our gears to baseball. Bonus time with Drennan. Big play. I love you, Menor Nissan. Hi, Bruce Drennan here from my good friends at Menor Nissan. Ray Sminchak, the whole staff. As you know, I've been doing a lot of our shows down in Florida, just returned. Great to be back on the home confines of our beautiful studios here at Burke Lakefront Airport for Big Play. But I got to tell you, I drove my Nissan Rogue from Menor Nissan down to Florida, had the rack up on top with extra luggage. It was absolutely the most splendid, beautiful ride. Just as smooth as could be. My wife also drives a Rogue. We rotated driving down there and back, but I just can't recommend it any more so to you. Get on out there, test drive a Rogue or a Murano or any of the other great products that they have out there at Menor Nissan. Don't forget, they're now in partnership with Infinity of Akron and Infinity of Beechwood. Check those great vehicles out as well. Service department is absolutely fantastic. Went back to the dealership to get maintenance after that long drive down there and back. And give them a call. Set up an appointment. Of course, check out their website at MenorNissan.com. That's MenorNissan.com. I love you, Menor Nissan. Hallelujah. Monday nights, 7-5 victory over Houston finally snapped the Guardians' 10-game losing streak. And during that streak, Cleveland was shut out 5 times. The Guards went 5 for 52 with runners in scoring position. That's a .96 average. And in Monday's game, they started 0 for 5 with runners in scoring position. But in the 5th inning, finally, the team broke out scoring 4 with Jose's 15th, a 3-run shot. However, Tanner Bybee couldn't hold the lead, promptly rendered 4 in the bottom of that frame as the first-place Astros tied it up. And in the top of the 6th, Rocchio doubled home 2 runs to give the Pen all they needed to hold on and stop the streak. This ended the longest losing streak for Cleveland since an 11-game drought in 2012, the year before Terry Francona became the manager of our team. And Monday avoided tying the longest losing streak this year by any team at 11, which is held by both Washington and the Athletics, whatever home they call them now. Baseball is the most unpredictable sport. We went into Houston in the midst of a terrible streak. The Astros were red hot, building a comfortable lead in the American League West. They were at home. We come in and snap the streak and then beat them again last night in extra innings. The Guards scored 4 in the 10th to break a 6-6 tie as Angel Martinez belted a grand slam. Just made it, but it was a grand slam to left off Josh Hader, one of the best closers in the major leagues. That's just amazing. Even though the Guards were out hit in the game 11-8, Cleveland used 7 pitchers in the game, and Jose and Monday night's hero, Rocchio, also hit long balls. 16 now for Jose, who has 44 RBIs and he stole 2 bases in the game. That gives the All-Star third baseman 24 on the season. Jose's now hitting .299 on the year, and I once again emphasize what an underrated superstar he is. Hopefully Slade Ciccone can have another fine performance. I like him. And complete the sweep of Houston. Wouldn't that be something? Before moving on to the south side of Chicago to take on the hapless White Sox, starting a weekend series. They're 30-62, the Sox are. Only Colorado has a worse record at 21-71. 21-71! I think it's safe to say that the Mile High fans can hardly wait for the Broncos to get started. More baseball in just a minute. Big play.
The Big Play Sports Network is brought to you by Lake Spur Marketing, connecting your brand to the right customers. Visit lakespurmarketing.com today.
All right, welcome back. Back to the Guardians. I've been saying for a month that we should be in a selling mode and bring the kids up. Let's get their feet wet. DeLauder, Brito, Kifus. In my opinion, there's every reason to believe that Cleveland can win the division next year. Remember, if we have a healthy Bieber, followed by Bybee, Williams, Ciccone, that's strong. The pen will be strong. I would say Ortiz included there, but who knows how long his suspension will be. And even if he does come back, has he lost the clubhouse? With Jose and Quan, you can build around these guys. And hopefully these kids can realize their potential. But let's face the facts. The season is over. Santana's hitting .230. Schneemann, .213. Arias, .231. Martinez, .238. Thomas, .160. Fry, .150. Hedges, .114. Jones, .229. Knoll, .140. Rocchio, .193. Come on. This is the major leagues. Trade Santana, trade Thomas. You won't get much for him, but trade him. As I said last week, I've changed my mind on trading Clase since examining his contract. He's locked up through 2026 with club options for 27 and 28. The All-Star break is upon us. It's time to face reality. By the way, congratulations to Jose and Stephen Kwan as American League All-Stars. Jose, of course, was voted in as the starting third baseman, and outfielder Stephen Kwan was added to the roster. And as I've stated here on the show before, these two, in my opinion, are untouchables. Quickly about Ortiz. 2 pitches. A slider to Randy Arozarena on June 15th, and a slider to Pedro Pates on June 27th. Rosarena's case opened the second inning and led to a 57-pitch inning. Pates opened the top of the third. Ortiz, pending the investigation, is facing a possible 1-year suspension or even a lifetime ban. I think they're going to make an example of him. I'm not predicting what that penalty will be, but they've got to make an example of him. By the way, if you're curious, the June 15th game was against Seattle. The Guards lost that game 6-0. The June 27th game was against the St. Louis Cardinals, and the Guards lost that one 5-0. Doug Kurkul, author of a fascinating book about baseball in the 60s, is next on Bonus Time with Drennan, Big Play Sports Network.
The Big Play Sports Network is brought to you by Garage Beer. No bitterness, no frills, no IPA, just beer-flavored beer. Find local retailers who sell garage beer near you by visiting drinkgaragebeer.com.
As I mentioned earlier in the show, we're proud to welcome Doug Kurkul, a native Clevelander who is a author, a very storied author, has written many books, including one in 2014 about the Cleveland Indians called Portrait of a Franchise. Also teamed up with former Indian Brett Butler in 2009, CEO of the Reno Sparks Chamber of Commerce in Nevada. Doug is a native Clevelander, Ashland University, and his most recent piece is titled "It's a Beautiful Day for a Ball Game." No, it's a beautiful day for baseball. The national pastime during the 1960s. Amazon's top 25 list for baseball history books. That tells you all you need to know. Doug, welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Great to be with you.
I want to start in 1960 with the World Series between the Yankees and the Pirates. I remember it vividly. I was only 10, but I remember it vividly. And what is really historic is that it's the widest margin of runs scored by a losing team. The Yankees actually scored 55 runs in that series. Pittsburgh scored 27, yet the Pirates won the series 4-3.
It was a remarkable World Series. The MVP of the series, Bobby Richardson, was from the losing side. And, a very interesting factoid is that in the 1960 World Series, that seventh game, often considered the best baseball game in World Series history, would you believe that the two teams averaged only 9 strikeouts combined per game? By the 2022 World Series, the two teams were striking out a combined 21 times. Just one example of how the game has changed so much since 1960.
That was a 10-9 final with the Pirates finally scoring a lot of runs. The games they won, obviously, were close, hard-fought games, 6-4, 3-2, 5-2. They won that last one 10-9. And, of course, capped off by Bill Mazeroski's storied home run, Doug.
Thousands of people still watch that footage on YouTube every single year. Nixon and Kennedy were getting ready to debate that night. It said they were following that game while they were getting ready for the debate. Bing Crosby, who was a co-owner of the Pirates, he was following the action from Paris, France. So this was an era when everybody in the country seemingly was really tied into baseball.
Boy, I'll tell you, just laid two things on me. I did not know that was the date of the Kennedy-Nixon debate, which really determined that 1960 very close election. If you listened to it on radio, you thought Nixon won. If you watched it on television, you were convinced that Kennedy won. And I forgot that Crosby was a part owner of the Pirates, right?
It was. He actually had a video recording made of it, and it was buried for decades. And then just within the last several years, somebody uncovered it. And, it's neat to have that footage.
I want to segue into your portion of the book about Mantle and Maris, but before I do, I have a historically, at least in my lifetime, I'm 75 now, Doug, and I consider obviously the 95 Indians as one of the most powerful, potent lineups of all time. I think the Pirates of 71, when they beat the Orioles, has also got to be mentioned. Obviously, the Big Red Machine, the Bashers of Oakland with Canseco and McGuire. But that Yankee team from those mid-50s through 64, Mantle, Maris, Berra, Howard, that's got to rank. Don't you agree?
Sure do. And they won that American League pennant 5 years in a row from 1960 to 64. Once they finally aged out, then the American League was wide open and other teams alternated. But for a number of years there, they were just too powerful for all the competition.
Talk about the Mantle-Maris rivalry. Obviously, they both were pursuing Ruth in 1961. Maris eventually did it with 61 home runs, surpassing Ruth's 60 back in 27. I believe Mantle got hurt near the end of the year, which thwarted his chances. He wound up with 54. But a big controversy, Doug, was that Ruth did it in 154 games, and baseball had expanded to 162 by then.
About what to see of any new record, and the commissioner and the American League president kind of fueled that questioning. The impact on the two men was different. Mantle seemed to stay relaxed, and the fans seemed to be on his side. Maris, it was really stressful for him. The interviews, he would have to answer the same questions over and over and over again. Not like today where, they would have a media scrum and he would just have to answer it once. It was very stressful. He had hair coming out. It was just a real difficult time for Roger, and he was much more relaxed in the future seasons.
Did they get along?
It seems like they did. They were actually housemates with one or two other teammates. They kind of went their own ways part of the time. Some of the time they would hang out together. But it was a friendly rivalry between them, even though the news media occasionally portrayed it differently.
So in other words, the New York media hasn't changed in all these decades, Doug.
Right.
Maury Wills, you write about Wills and his incredible accomplishments. For younger viewers, it's an educational book, and this show, doing these segments with you, certainly so as well. Wills stole 104 bases in 1962 that broke Ty Cobb's record that many thought would never be broken.
Right. So, in the 1950s, it was Louis Aparicio who kind of reintroduced the stolen base. But Maury Wills was the guy who showed how it could be made into such a weapon that could help a team win the pennant. And, this summer when Dick Allen goes into the Hall of Fame, he will be the 56th player from the 1960s to be in the Hall of Fame. There are still people who think that Maury Wills probably should go in at some point. Of course, Rocky Colavito is another name that a lot of us with Cleveland roots think belongs in the Hall of Fame.
And of course, Wills was part of the great Dodger teams
Yes.
that really they beat the White Sox in '59, but they really came about in '63 with that incredible 1-2 combination of Koufax and Drysdale. And of course, Wills was the leadoff man. He played shortstop. Willie Davis, part of that team, was considered the fastest man from first to third ever. But Koufax, oh my, I think he's the greatest pitcher I've ever seen. Give me your take.
Absolutely. There were a number of great storylines from the 1960s, and Koufax's dominance in the early 60s through his retirement in 66. That's really one of the stories of the decade. He was just unhittable many of the afternoons and evenings that he pitched.
And the 63 World Series, I believe it was game one in New York, where Koufax started for the Dodgers and struck out the first 5 Yankees that he faced, including Mantle and Maris and Tommy Tresh, Tony Kubek, later on teamed with Kurt Gowdy for many years on the NBC telecast Game of the Week. Bobby Richardson, unbelievable. Koufax and his career, the amazing thing to me, his career was shortened. What do you have, arthritis in his arm? But his statistics during his tenure were so overwhelmingly dominant, they couldn't do anything but quickly induct him into the Hall.
Yes, and that's why it was so stunning when he announced his retirement at age 30 or 31, because he was at the top of the sport when he made that announcement. But he knew he was risking his health if he was to continue to go out there and take the cortisone shots constantly. And so he did what was best for him.
What do you think? The sophistication of the the clock, miles per hour, it wasn't like it is today. What do you think he would have been clocked at today if he played?
Apparently Sudden Sam was clocked at 103 on one occasion, and everybody compared him and Koufax as throwing just as hard as one another. So he was, I think, way ahead of most of those pitchers, probably over 100.
Doug, about 4 years ago, I interviewed Sam McDowell, great Cleveland Indian. And I said to him, boy, Sam, in your era, they considered you the Sandy Koufax of the American League. And I think he got peeved off at me. He says, I was faster than Koufax.
Right. Yeah, I interviewed him as well, and it was one of the most interesting interviews. He, as you know, Bruce, he was very frustrated with the manager, Joe Adcock, back in '67, and that otherwise probably was a year they could have contended, but there were just so many bad decisions made.
One other note about Koufax. I remember, you're based in Chicago. That's where I'm originally from. I remember taking a transition radio to bed on a school night, and I listened to the game between the Cubs and the Los Angeles Dodgers on the West Coast, and Koufax threw a perfect game. But a lot of people don't realize, amongst his no-hitters, that perfect game that he threw, that same game, a lefty with the Cubs by the name of Bob Hendley threw a one-hitter.
That's I did not remember that story. That is remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Let's go to 67 and 66 and 67 when we witnessed something I don't believe we'll ever, ever, ever see again. Certainly not in our lifetime, Doug, and I don't mean to rush you. But back-to-back triple crowns with Frank Robinson and Carl Yastrzemski. How amazing was that?
Sure was, considering how few there have been through the years. Frank Robinson, of course, had just arrived in the American League after a very successful career with the Reds. And it was exactly what the Orioles needed, because the Orioles every year, they were coming in second or third place, and they weren't drawing a lot of fans. Once they got Frank Robinson, look at how well they did the next 6 years.
Oh, a dominance, absolute dominance. And, of course, they shocked the baseball world in 66. They went up against that Dodgers team with Koufax and Drysdale, who the previous year had beaten Minnesota again for a World Series crown. And the Orioles swept them in 4 straight games. And in 67, of course, with Yaz and the Red Sox, they wound up losing in 7 to that great St. Louis Cardinal team. We're talking to Doug Kurkul. He is the author of It's a Beautiful Day for Baseball, the national pastime of the 60s. Fascinating, educational, historical. We're going to do another segment with Doug, and we'll do so in just a minute.
The Big Play Sports Network is brought to you by Smart Choice Windows. Energy-efficient products at an affordable price. Visit smartchoicewindows.com today.
Back with Doug Kurkul, author of It's a Beautiful Day for Baseball. What a book this is. Amazon's top 25 list for baseball history books. Just tremendous stuff in here. We can't go on to talk about a lot of individual players that I want to do so with you during the 60s, Doug, before we talk about the 69 Miracle Mets. You write about it in the book. And what really, a lot of people asked me here in 2016 when the Indians played the Cubs in the World Series if I was torn or if I'm still a Cubs fan. And I said, man, I've been here in Cleveland, all these decades. I did the games on TV. Plus, the Cubs broke my heart in 1969. Give me a break. The Miracle Mets were the reason they did break my heart.
Yeah, that 1969 Cubs team had such a comfortable lead for a while. There is a school of thought that maybe Leo DeRocher did not rest his regulars enough, but the Mets were young. They had amazing pitching, and they went on such a hot streak that it would have been hard for the Cubs to do anything but fade into second place. And I can only imagine how heartbreaking it was for you and the Cubs fans.
Yeah, as of August 14th of that season, the Cubs were the Mets were 14 games behind the Cubs, and then turned around, got on that unbelievable streak, and wound up beating the Cubs by 8 games in the National League East. That was the first year of divisional play, an 18-game differential. And it all started with a 4-game series in New York, which started, you'll recall, Ron Santo getting on that center fielder. Young was his last name. I forget his first name. And there was a clubhouse cancer that started that night with the Cubs getting swept that series by New York.
Yes, I've read several books in addition to interviewing players about that 1969 Cubs team. And, the players look back on it with a little bit of regret, but they genuinely value the camaraderie that they had. But it was, along with the 1964 Phillies, it really was, kind of a collapse for the ages.
Yeah, which featured Richie Allen, who you mentioned earlier. Speaking of Allen, the Cubs' great star of the 60s, Ernie Banks. The 60s also marked the real, Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby, of course, broke the color barriers in their respective leagues. But the 60s were really the emergence of African-American and Latino from other countries breaking into the majors. There was so many of them, Doug.
It's absolutely true. And the African-American players in particular, they were still facing discrimination in outright and sometimes subtle forms. But the competition in the 60s was more stiff than any other previous era because, as you said, so many of the Black players, so many of the Latino players were making their mark in the game.
I tell younger fans, you could make a case for Roberto Clemente perhaps being the greatest all-around position player of all time. What do you think?
Steve Blass, who was his teammate all those years in Pittsburgh, said that the statistics, although he did win 4 batting titles, the statistics don't even tell the full story. He said that the players on the Pirates, they just couldn't take their eyes off the guy because he was so remarkable. His throwing arm, the grace with which he ran, and of course his batting stroke. Just a remarkable player in an era where there were a lot of great outfielders, and yet he's right up there with them.
Oh, the greatest arm ever, I think, in right field. And he used that gigantic lumber bat that he'd pull one down the left field line. Next at bat, he'd slice one down the right field line. Other greats of the era, obviously Hank Aaron, Orlando Cepeda, especially when he went to St. Louis, or Zolio Versailles, Antonio Oliva of the Minnesota Twins, Willie Mays, Willie McCovey. The list goes on and on, Doug.
It really does. The 56 players that are in the Hall of Fame, there are not weak links there. These are all players who really genuinely are all-time greats.
And non-minority players that rank among the all-time greats. Eddie Matthews, Brooks Robinson, the human vacuum cleaner at third for Baltimore. Yes. We mentioned Koufax, Don Drysdale, Whitey Ford, Yogi Berra, Killebrew, Bob Gibson, oh God, Lou Brock, Denny McClain, Denny Lolich from that great Detroit team, K-Line, Tommy Agee. Amazing players during that era.
One of the things we talked about in the book was that in the early 60s, you had the final years of players like Ted Williams and Stan Musial and Duke Snider. Then by the end of the 60s, you had that new generation of talent, Reggie Jackson, Tom Seaver, and of course, Pete Rose came in around 63. And some of the players you mentioned, they were dominant for the whole decade.
And the final thing too here, a lot of baseball fans have absolutely no clue that in the early 60s there were still that was the end of it. I don't know how many years they did it in a row, Doug, but there were 2 All-Star games.
Yes. Yeah, that was in the early 60s. And they retired that. The interesting thing was that the All-Star games had very high ratings back in those days. And, Sam McDowell made the point in his book that back in the 60s, the top players could walk down the street of any American city, Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, Carl Yastrzemski, Frank Robinson, and almost everybody would recognize them. You think about now, it just doesn't have quite. I think Ohtani would be recognized in just about every city, Aaron Judge, but the list is probably a lot shorter in comparison to back in the 60s.
Can baseball fix that?
Well, I think that baseball they made a good move by speeding up the game, with the pitch clock. Now I think they've got to figure out a way to reduce the strikeouts, because when players strike out, the balls are not being put in play. You don't have as much action. I think we need to get back to the day where there's more action actually happening on the field. The game is always going to be great.
But do we have a societal problem, though? I mean, when you go to a game and you see the younger generation looking at their phones, how many of them do you think know how to keep score?
Oh, that's such a great point. Yeah. And, some of the listeners from your generation and mine, we grew up going to games with our father or our grandfather and hearing the old stories and keeping score. I always encourage parents now, encourage them to have their kids play baseball and to learn to love the game as a fan too. It's just a great part of life.
It's a beautiful day for baseball. It's the national pastime during the 1960s, written by native Clevelander Doug Kurkul. Get that book. It's very historical and educational. Doug, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bruce. A pleasure.
All right, when we get back, it's time for the Ask Bruce segment. That's next. Bonus time with Drennan here on the Big Play Sports Network.
The Big Play Sports Network is brought to you by Pure AV, luxury home automation. Experience your dream smart home by visiting pureavcorp.com.
I want to ask you about Kurkul, but before we do, any comments on what I said about the Guardians All-Star break, trading deadline, etc.?
It'd just be nice if everybody could put it together at once. Brian Rocchio showing some life, doing what you want a 9-hitter to do, and then some. Laying down those bunts is critical. Nolan Jones showing a sign of life. I guess it's still possible, Bruce. You got a long half of the season after this All-Star break, but I know it's not what you want.
I can't face the reality.
Sorry, Bruce. I just like to be a little optimistic, although you're right. I do believe the season is, unfortunately, over a little bit earlier than we would have liked to hope for our Cleveland Guardians.
How about Doug Kurkul?
Doug Kurkul is amazing. I literally learned so much. Half the names, I got to say, I didn't realize who they were. I had no idea. As I said, I wasn't alive in that era, believe it or not. But just absolutely fascinating stuff. And go get his book. That's all I can say.
And, the most fascinating point I think he made in the interview, which is so true. In that era, all those stars could walk into any American League city and be recognized, hounded for autographs. No pictures because they didn't have cell phones then. But today, outside of Ohtani and Judge, isn't that something?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, if I saw Javier Baez, that's just the first name I thought of, walking around the street. To be honest with you, Bruce, I'm not sure that I would recognize him. Yeah. Not that Javier is a star or anything, but the point remains the same. Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Alrighty, Bruce. First question for you. Hey, Bruce, aside from the All-Stars, Ramirez and Kwan, do you see any other Guardians, hitters, /position players as building blocks for 2026 and beyond?
Yes, Manzardo is raising his batting average, and I think he's going to realize his potential. That's why I'm emphasizing bring up DeLauder and Kifus and Brito. These guys have all had great minor league hitting statistics, and if they can get acclimated to the majors along with Manzardo, and you keep Jose and you keep Kwan, there's your lineup. I mean, you got enough power and run production there if, and that's a big if, I realize, with every prospect, but if these guys realize their potential or come close to it.
Alrighty. Hey, Bruce, what do you foresee the Guardians doing with Gabriel Arias once he's back on the roster from IL? He's out of options, and Brian Rocchio's looking pretty darn good.
Yeah, I know. I'm glad I don't have to make that decision, quite frankly. I love defense. I mean, you can't ask a pitcher in the majors. I mean, how many pitchers average 10 strikeouts a game? They depend on those guys behind them with the gloves. So you can't emphasize enough how important you talk about defense in other sports. To me, the defense is most important in baseball. And I wish we had more clarity on statistical clarity on how many runs are saved because of great defensive plays in baseball.
If the Guardians do elect to trade Emmanuel Clase by the trade deadline, do you believe Cade Smith is ready to take on the full-time role as closer?
Absolutely. I have no reservations in that at all. As I pointed out a couple of weeks ago, before I changed my mind on Clase, yeah, I don't think we miss a beat. And then we'll have other guys healthy from the pen that have been hurt this year. That bullpen will remain one of the best in the majors. So I'm not worried or concerned about that at all. But I will say this, Clase, when you've got him next year, 27, 28, if you desire, and that's the club option, I mean, he could come. Look at Hader. Hader had a bad year last year for Houston after coming over from the National League, and look at him this year. He's the best closer in the majors, except for last night against the Guardians.
Alrighty, last one for you, Bruce. Hey, Bruce, has Tanner Bybee's performance this season made you question at all if he has what it takes to become a true ace?
No, because, and I don't know if he's ever going to become a true ace, but he's certainly capable of being a very strong number 2 or 3. And he might become an ace. Sometimes pitchers, they'll have a great rookie year, off year, sophomore, jinx, call it what you want, come back the third year. I mean, look at Skubal. Skubal's been in the majors several years, Not that Bybee has his kind of stuff, but I'm trying to make a point in answering the question. Pitchers, again, the sport is unpredictable. Pitchers are especially unpredictable. I like that pitching staff, and hopefully these hitters can come up and develop. We need them. And we need you to keep watching Bonus Time with Drennan here on the Big Play Sports Network. Hope you enjoyed today's show. I'm Bruce Drennan on behalf of Ryan Smith. You have a great week, and we'll see you next week. We'll preview the British Open, the last of the 4 majors in golf. Until then, as always, and most importantly, you remember, I love you, Ohio. And I love you, Cleveland.